She built one of the most decorated careers in Hollywood history. 2 Oscars, 3 Emmys, a Tony, and 5 decades of unforgettable performances, stretching from A Giant Ape's leading lady to Broadway's most punishing tragedies. And then, at the peak of a role that made her a horror icon to an entirely new generation, she simply walked away. For years, fans of American Horror Story have wondered what actually pushed Jessica Lange out the door after 4 unforgettable seasons. Now, in her own words across a string of interviews, most people never connected together. The real answer has finally come into focus, and it has almost nothing to do with the show itself. To understand why she left, you first have to understand everything she'd already survived to get there. Jessica Phyllis Lange was born on April 20, 1949, in Cloquet, Minnesota, the daughter of a traveling salesman whose work kept the family moving through a string of small towns growing up. She studied art at the University of Minnesota, where she met her first husband, photographer Paco Grande, and the two eventually left together for Paris, where Lange studied mime under Etienne Decroux before drifting into modeling work back in New York. She was, by her own later admission, an unlikely candidate for movie stardom at the time, with no formal acting training and no connections whatsoever to the industry she was about to walk into. In 1976, producer Dino De Laurentiis was searching for an unknown face to star in his big-budget remake of King Kong, and Lange, broke and mostly unnoticed, walked into the audition with nothing to lose. Foolhardily, I believed I could do anything, she told Vanity Fair years later, describing herself walking into that cattle call at 114 pounds, looking nothing like the tall, buxom blondes the casting directors were used to seeing. By the time it was her turn, the director had already left for the day, and she ended up doing her screen test for the assistant director instead, who was impressed enough to call the director back down personally. She got the part, but the film that made her instantly famous also nearly broke her. Before filming began, De Laurentiis wasn't even convinced she was attractive enough for the role, and Lange had to gain weight, lighten her hair, and have her braces removed just to be considered camera-ready. King Kong was a 9-month shoot spent acting almost entirely opposite a blank wall or a mechanical ape, with no formal training. And no idea whether any of it was working, relying heavily on the mime techniques she'd studied years earlier in Paris, just to give herself something to hold on to in scenes with no real scene partner at all. We shot for 9 months, and we'd have a lot of downtime, she recalled decades later, describing the strange, isolating rhythm of a blockbuster production built around special effects rather than performance. De Laurentiis, hungry for a marketing angle, publicly compared her to the next Marilyn Monroe, a label Lange has said upset her deeply, even decades later. "That really upsets me," she said at the time. She was a tragic figure who led a tragic life and who wasn't taken as the serious artist she was. I don't want to compete with her memory or with anyone. The film was a box office hit, but critics tore into her performance specifically, dismissing her as a former model who'd gotten lucky, and despite a 7-year contract with De Laurentiis, Lange didn't work again for 3 years. She spent that stretch back in New York studying seriously with acting teachers Sandra Seacat and Mira Rostova, determined to actually learn the craft she'd stumbled into rather than simply trade on the attention King Kong had given her. The real turning point came in 1982, and it came twice in the same year. Director Graham Clifford cast her as doomed actress Frances Farmer in Frances, a punishing, deeply committed performance that had her watching hours of Farmer's old home movies and footage, including summer stock films from before Farmer was even famous, and losing weight and sleep until she was teetering, by her own account, on the edge of a breakdown by the time filming wrapped. It remains to many critics the single best performance of her career. The same year, almost as a form of recovery, she took the completely opposite kind of role, playing a vain, demanding soap opera diva in the comedy Tootsie, a part she said she needed specifically to clear her head after the exhausting intensity of Frances. The Academy nominated her for both performances that year, Best Actress for Frances and Best Supporting Actress for Tootsie, a feat only one other actress in Oscar history, Teresa Wright back in 1942, had ever managed. She won Best Supporting Actress for Tootsie that night, still to date the highest-grossing film of her entire career. Best Actress went to a rising star named Meryl Streep, for her performance in Sophie's Choice, and the two blonde actresses, born only 2 months apart, would spend the rest of the decade being quietly measured against each other by an industry that loved a good rivalry narrative more than either woman ever seemed to. According to friends close to her at the time, the moment Lange collected her own award, early in the ceremony she reportedly turned to someone nearby and said, "That's the moment I knew Meryl had won Best Actress," a quiet, knowing acknowledgement of exactly how the night was going to end. Lange has since made peace with the comparison in her own dry way. Decades later, asked about a line in Feud where her character, Joan Crawford, claimed to sleep with her Oscars, Lange laughed and set the record straight for herself. "Well, I don't," she said, adding simply that they're not used as doorstops either. It was on the set of Frances, in fact, that Lange's own life quietly detonated, in ways that took her years to speak about publicly. She was still involved with the Russian ballet dancer Mikhail Baryshnikov, whom she'd met after the long, quiet stretch following King Kong, but an on-set connection with her co-star, playwright, and actor Sam Shepard snowballed into something neither of them expected. "Sam and I were so much in love, so wild about each other and being together," she told Vanity Fair in 1991. "We were absolutely inseparable. We couldn't even go to the grocery store without each other." Shepard, for his part, was married at the time to actress Olan Jones, and the affair unfolded amid its own tangle of complications, Lange caring for a newborn daughter with Baryshnikov, while falling for a man she's described as endlessly mysterious, someone who was always disappearing into his own world of music and nightlife. Leaving Baryshnikov for Shepard cost her a 2-year silence between them once she told him she was living with someone else, a rupture she's called the ultimate betrayal from his side, and one of the most painful periods of her life. "I would never want to go through that again," she said. But her bond with Shepard endured for the next 27 years, producing 2 children, Hannah and Samuel, and one of Hollywood's most private, most enduring partnerships, one the two of them mostly kept out of the press entirely. "He's a great man, a natural man, which is rare," she said of him in that same 1991 interview. "I've had romances with what you'd call famous men, and none compared to Sam in terms of maleness." She's also spoken since about how much motherhood itself reordered her entire sense of self, describing a shift that no amount of professional success had ever given her. "It opened my heart and made me a different person," she told AARP magazine years later. "Every move you make is with someone else in mind. I loved being a mother more than anything else in the world, and being a grandmother is even more fun." Lange kept building one of the most respected bodies of work of her generation through the 80s and 90s, earning Oscar nominations for Country, Sweet Dreams, and Music Box, roles that consistently cast her as women pushed to their breaking point by circumstance, before finally winning her second Academy Award, this time for Best Actress, playing a fragile, unraveling military wife in 1994's Blue Sky, a performance shelved for 2 years by a studio bankruptcy before it ever reached theaters. She added a Tony Award decades later in 2016 for her searing performance as Mary Tyrone in a Broadway revival of Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night, completing what's known in the industry as the Triple Crown of acting, an Oscar, an Emmy, and a Tony, an honor only a small handful of performers in history have ever achieved across film, television, and stage alike. That Emmy came from an unlikely place, one Lange herself admits she never expected to find herself in. In 2011, director Ryan Murphy asked her to join a new, strange horror anthology series called American Horror Story, and Lange has said she only agreed to a single season at first. "When I originally agreed to do this, it was for 1 season, she told Deadline. "I thought, this will be interesting to try. I've never done this kind of television before." As Constance Langdon, the venomous, secretive neighbor at the center of Murder House, Lange found something in the character that reminded her of the extreme, uncompromising role she'd chased in her younger years, and audiences responded instantly, both to the character and to a string of major award nominations that followed almost immediately. That response changed everything about her arrangement with the show. Murphy kept writing her back in year after year, and, unusually for television, He began building entire seasons around conversations with Lange herself before a single script page was written, treating her less like a hired lead and more like a genuine creative partner. Sister Jude Martin, the punishing, secretly haunted nun running asylum, came next, followed by Supreme Witch Fiona Good in Coven, and finally circus ringleader Elsa Mars in Freak Show, a role reportedly built specifically around a passion Lange had mentioned to Murphy directly, her own fascination with traveling sideshows and the decadent doomed glamour of Weimar-era German culture. In Freak Show, she even sang the songs herself, rather than lip-syncing, delivering haunting, full-throated live renditions of David Bowie's Life on Mars. And, in a later season, Lana Del Rey's Gods and Monsters, performances that became instant fan favorites, and some of the most replayed clips of the entire franchise, clips that still circulate widely years later. Across those 4 lead seasons, she picked up 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe,